Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. And we actually won't be able to enter any dungeon for a moment, though, because we are now being stalked by some sort of ghost. He cries, "The house. Take me. The house. At the bay." We then must escort this ghost to an abandoned house near Martha's Bay, which apparently used to be his residence. We then bring the ghost inside to have a look at his old home. He remarks, "Nostalgia. Unchanged." When he's had his fill, he requests us to return him to his grave near the cemetery, and after laying him to rest, we are greeted once again by our sort of guide, the owl. He reminds us of our next destination in Martha's Bay, as he also tells us, "The closer you get to the windfish, the more restless he sleeps." Taking a dive in Martha's Bay brings us to our next dungeon, Catfishs Maw, whose entrance looks like a straight-up catfish. Pretty wild. Not only the entrance, but also the map layout. It kind of reminds me of the demon in The Legend of Zelda. You just look at this big, screaming, scary face. It has a more kind of aggressive, like, pounding track, too, to kind of go with the intensity of that face. So I like that. The music's bum, 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 bum. Gets your heart pumping, you know? You might think, I guess, that this will be another water dungeon, but we mostly got that with Angler's Tunnel. You definitely get the feeling from this dungeon that it's meant to evoke some sort of water-adjacent themes with some of its enemies, and the floors are all sandy. There's even some flooded rooms with some more underwater sections, actually, like even the puzzle to get to the Nightmare's Key in this one involves a deep water in one single room that the owl statue gives you a hint to dive in that room between where the torch lights cross or something like that. So there is some water in some underwater areas, but it's really more unique than being just a water-themed dungeon. And I want to get to the main unique element, I think, that is the theme of this dungeon, but it's really been unfolding lately that it's worth it to just kind of take a look at the layout and progression of these dungeons. I've been loving looking at the maps. So if we look at what is just the initial explorable area of this dungeon, it's a little bit limited, and it's certainly more like linear, I guess. You can see like a chest you can't reach and a door you can't open. Some teases there. We get access to the compass, which is nice, but otherwise we just really to progress, we gotta find the one key that goes to that one door. And if you take a little trip through an underground passageway, it leads us to a room that where you have to solve a sort of little block puzzle to get a key. But I think too, people might not get that right away, and they might check out the room next to it, which is conspicuously empty. But it has a skull pattern on the floor. So, interesting things going here. But I assume eventually people would figure out what you got to do with the block puzzle and get the key, and then go to the next portion of the dungeon, which sort of has only one point that you can like progress like in a linear sort of sense. But we now have like a slightly larger explorable area. And it's got a lot of like dead end teases once again. There's a few points that are not accessible to us yet that we'll have to remember to come back to. You got your classic stone beak pickup. That's always a great sort of optional pickup. Definitely useful if you don't know what you're doing. But our real destination brings us to what I consider to be the real theme of this dungeon, which is one of its mini bosses, one of them. So this guy, he's a big, imposing Stalfos that you have to do battle with. We have to do battle with. The owl statue in the previous room, which, good thing we get that stone beak, right? But But it tells you how to beat him, basically. You have to knock him down with your sword, and then lay a bomb to actually defeat him after his bones crumble into a pile there. Just when it seems like he's almost done, this guy actually speaks, which we've seen the bosses do, but now the mini-bosses are talking to us as well. He says, I can't beat you. I'm out of here. Maybe a little less intimidating than he seemed like at first, but he takes off, and he takes what could be the treasure with him. In the next room, we find an empty chest with a note that says, "I've got what was inside this box. Come and get it if you can." Now, one might put together, judging from the room we fought him in, which is also marked with a skull pattern on the floor, that we gotta backtrack to the previous skull pattern room. Now, a keen observer will notice if you go back there that the first room we fought him in is marked with 1 block, and the other one has 4. Now that, we know now, is meant to indicate the order in which to face him. So I think maybe if you go back, you might put that together. Or you could not have noticed that at all and just continued progressing through the dungeon, not going back to that previous room. But either way, I think that's pretty neat. It's again, I think that's going to come up a lot, where there's really not much like you can do out of order in certain locations, but like it's more of remembering where you need to go. And I think it's really effective in this dungeon. From this point on, we have access to mostly the whole dungeon. At least you can see most parts of it. And if we pick up the map, it will show us that. But there's plenty more teases of chests that we can't get to. So that's pretty neat. Pretty, just tantalizing you, right? And we can also find in any order location 2 and 3 to fight Master Salphos here, as he's called. He's clearly intimidated by us, because when we show up, he says, "Gulp, you found me. You're a real pesky kid, you know that?" Love the personality on this guy. After defeating him the second and third time, we should now know where we need to go, which is back to that skull room from early on. That's what's, makes these interesting, is remembering you gotta go back there, taking these underground passages which spit you out another part of the dungeon. Like, things are starting to get a little bit more complex, and not in a like linear versus non-linear way. It's very creative. So we finally take this dude down, and we're gifted with what he had taken from that chest way back earlier in the dungeon, which is the Hookshot. Much like Angler's Tunnel, with most of the dungeon already uncovered to us, we now have, access to all these juicy teases that have been there from the beginning. We can finally get to them. There's, some rupees, which are always nice, but our final quest that we really have in the dungeon is gathering up all the keys that we can now reach. There's 2 key blocks, one's optional, and the door to the Nightmare's Chamber that can still be unlocked. Of course, the 3 keys for all of these things can be found in different areas of the dungeon in any sort of order, so I think that's cool. And either key can be used on either block, if you even unlock the other one. The Hookshot is just such a satisfying item in this dungeon because of all the teases, and use it to hook these walkways that make bridges that you can walk over, and it just feels so good shooting across gaps, especially in one room where you like whip by these blade traps really quick that, like, earlier we could have jumped over them kind of and powered through, and it's really frustrating, especially if you don't realize, I'm going to get an item that'll make this easier, only to get to the other side of it and see like, we can't progress and have to go back. But now we get to whip by them really quick. And it does the classic thing of, like, now a lot of the enemies in the dungeon are much easier to defeat. Like, the obvious example is many of the Helmosaurs that can only be beaten by hitting them in the back. Now you can hookshot their mask off, which is feels really good. I think it's also kind of worth noting, I didn't know really where to get into it, but like it's not just there's all these ways that it, you know, with such a simple layout, it can make things feel more complex. And in other ways, there's like very good use of like one-way doors or like rooms that you have to circle around to progress. There, you know, and it, even though you can like know I need to go here, it's not always as like easy as like directly going there. And so I like, there's a lot of great use of that in this dungeon. In particular, there's one room that just has a block in the middle, and you're kind of forced to like pick which way you want to go. And it's not that complicated, but it does like kind of push you in different directions that you wouldn't think to go, or like you might not realize, oh, I can just walk off the screen and come back and push the block again to go a different way. But, you know, it's something. I think it's cool. So at this point, you know, if we've got the keys and we get to the Nightmare's Chamber, you know, there is an optional key block here, and it does lead to a room with another mini boss, which is 2 Gomas. Nice to see these guys back. It's a nice little mini boss battle. Don't get me wrong. And I've realized its actual purpose now is to create a portal from the beginning of the dungeon to that room, which is right next to another room with an underground passageway that leads right outside the Nightmare's Chamber. So it's like a nice little checkpoint. You know, it's an optional fight, and if you know what you're doing, you can pretty easily skip it. It's in a weird spot for sure, but I now really appreciate it for what it is. In the Nightmare's Chamber, we are confronted by Slime Eel, who is a big scary eel that breaks through the walls and the floor, and we get some more boss chatter from him. He says, "So, you are the outsider." He talks like, apparently, do eels hiss like snakes? You've come to wake the windfish. I shall eat you. So, this guy is aware of us, and he is pissed off. The fight itself is maybe my favorite boss fight in the game so far. You gotta jump over and avoid his tail while trying to use the hookshot to pull him out of the wall and then hit his weak spot on his side. It's very simple, but it's just so fun, I think. This was really seeing the kind of formula of use the dungeon item on the boss really take place in this game. Like, that's really been the case for these last 3 bosses at least, but it's good in this. After we defeat this guy, he talks to us some more, which is very interesting, I think. We get some more concerning words from him. He says, tisk tisk. I think he tisks us, but he says, "You don't seem to know what kind of island this is." What a fool. Very concerning, for sure. Concerning words. Maybe the sweet sounds of the wind marimba will calm us down. Maybe. But as we fade into white, we are once again teased. And this time the words we are teased with are shrine. An island secret in the shrine. So the jury's still out a little bit. That's definitely still very intriguing for sure. If you can't tell already by the length of this video, I really enjoy this dungeon. I had a blast playing through it. I felt really strong about it, and then, you know, just getting a good look at how it's, you know, laid out and how it's got this cool villain that you kind of chase throughout the dungeon, and all these great teases, and, you know, a good mix of linear versus non-linear, and even in the linear portions, it just feeling like a big open puzzle. having that same element from Angler's Tunnel about like, oh, now the whole dungeon is my oyster, and where do I go? It's just really, yeah, you can really see how this game nailed the Zelda formula. It kind of really establishes it because it's so satisfying and really it's just a blueprint for all the later games. I would rank this very high. I felt very passionate about it. It's my favorite in Link's Awakening so far. The gimmick of Skull Woods is incredible. I really thought that would hold the line much better, but I think this one just really does it for me and puts it above that. Palace of Darkness, I really do like the progression and everything from that, but I think this dungeon really just has everything I really like, and I think I'll bump it up above that. I'd have it stop short, I think, of Misery Mire. I could see it beating it for sure, but Misery Mire has so much more of that late game, the real late game open-endedness to it, and I just love that. And there's still more Link's Awakening dungeons to come. We're only 5 in, and it's already in the top 3, so it's no slouch for sure. It's definitely gonna be clogging up the top of the list for sure. So I feel very strongly about this one. So once again, thanks to everyone for coming by and listening. This one was great. I am very much looking forward to the shrine and finding out an island secret, or the island secret. They changed it actually in the Switch version, but we're gonna find out a secret next week. Spoiler alert.